So this is lecture 2. The first lecture, we went over the logistics of the class. And the second lecture, we went over part of chapter 1. So I want to finish chapter 1 now. What we already covered, I may just go a bit faster than normal. And we'll start now. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Francisco Ortega, and this is CGS 4854 here at Florida International University, lecture 2B. So when I started the lecture, I wanted you to see this quote by Mark Weiser from 1999. The most profound technologies are those that disappear. And the reason for this is that regardless whether you're creating desktop application, iPhone applications, Android, websites, web apps, the most profound change that you can give to a user is when they don't realize the technology is there. An example I gave in class was that my dad is not able to use the computer, but he's able to use the iPad and the iPod and the smartphones, and he's also able to use the Kindle Fire and so on. So keep in mind when you create an application for the 21st century. So we did cover this on May 5th, 2012. I will have a separate video going over Java. We did go over some Java in this lecture. We will cover the entire chapter 1. Remember my office hours, I have them Thursday. I may have some special office hours on Tuesdays this week. So we start with a protocol, right? So what is a protocol? Personally, I like the definition between an agreement between states. I got this from the dictionary from reference.com. For me to communicate with someone else in order that we can understand each other, we have to agree to a set of rules. And this is why I like this agreement. There's definitely many other definitions. We did go over them in class. You can read the book for that matter as well. And I want you to be able to come up with your own examples of what a protocol is. Just remind you about the book. The book is excellent for this class. It really takes you step by step, and it shows you not only part of the technology, but it gives you some insight to how things are working. So can you come out with your own definitions? So one protocol, the protocol in the internet, so is HTTP. You guys remember what HTTP stands for? What about the HT in the HTTP? So anyways, in the HTTP, we have a browser and we have a server. So the browser will send a request when you go to a website, let's say google.com. This will send a request, google.com/search advanced search.html. This will send a request. It'll have a request header. Once it has blank line, it means if it finished the request, unless we're sending a post type of message, it will have additional information. And then the server will reply and will send the information back. I personally like to think of this as a stateless form of communication. The browser just sends a request and the server will reply with a response. Much more on this on the later chapters. We'll discuss about what I just meant by stateless versus state session. So So we have the request format. We can go back here. So we're the browser. We have the request format. So you'll have a type of request. What is it that I'm requesting? And you'll see in the book in table 1.1, table 1.2, request header, common request headers, and common response headers. So, which leads to the second part, which is request header. So type of request, request header, and once we finish a blank line, that indicates end of request headers. And like I said, if it's a post request, there can be additional information after the blank line. Same thing for response format. We have status code, response header, and blank line. So let's go back to the image here. We're sending here a get. This is the request. We're sending some request header. And then the response is 200. Okay, so that's the status code. And it's sending back some response headers with a blank line at the end. And the HTML code. So we have the request format, response format. So we went over this in class. What about the multipurpose internet mail extension? So we could, for example, say, okay, if it's an HTML file, the extension must be HTML. That's one way of looking at it, right? But the way that it's done is using the MIME type to be able to tell the browser, this is going to be an HTML file. It's much better than saying HTML. It's going to be the default extension. We could use extensions, right? Like in the Word document, you have a .doc. But I could have another program that uses that .doc as well. And they may have different ASCII or binary formats. So this is the way we tell the browser what we are sending, the type is going to be a type HTML. So markup language. I really like the example here of Downey in the book. So he gives an example of him writing an essay, and the instructor, the professor, correcting him, doing small little markups, which is in figure 1.2 of the book. And we can also think, for example, in word processing, we have markup. We don't see it really in Word. But if you were using a no-all word processor, sometimes you had to type the markup language. There's some examples I'll show you. I'll give you the names. You can Google them if you want to see how they are, of different markup language. You're probably thinking right now of HTML, which is the one that is of interest to us. So just markup language is a way to note content in a way that it's going to be rendered. You can think of that. So you have content and you have text, and you want to give some meaning to this text. For example, we have bold, so we can say that the text inside of the B and the /B with the could be a markup that determines in a special program that that's going to be bold. We'll see for the HTML the actual types. So some examples, like I say, HTML, the one you can go view source on your browser, you see the markup language there, but it's just text. I said you can't really say I program in HTML, it's just text. You have XML. This was just primarily for data exchange. And you have text, which is used, I use it a lot for publishing documents or small quizzes or exams, or it can be used to write a book. It's another type of markup language. There is a mixture of programming on text. Anyways, what we're concentrating here is HTML. So the HTML tags. This is what allows us to mark up what we want. So we have the singleton. So you can think of right now, we went over this in class, what kind of singletons do we have in HTML? So it's a single tag that has no closing tag. What about per? You can think of right now, we also gave examples during class, a tag that actually is a pair. So bold is one of them. So here we have some examples. So the BR for break is a line break. HR for horizontal line. We have image for an image, and there's many more. For per, we have the paragraph, hello world. So it will give you a paragraph, and you'll break the line. Strong, gray class to make it bold. We can give an EM for emphasis, and so on. The important concept here is we have singleton tags, right? And you see how the tags is marked by the less than and greater than keys, and in between you add the type of tag that you want. And in the case of the per one, you have always a slash before the ending tag. So, as I said in class, I imagine that chapter 1 would be the most known to all of you. And anyways, if you guys have questions, please ask during class or during my office hours. Read the book. But in general, these chapters is just to make sure that we cover the basics, but I think most of you already have some experience with it. Now, so we're going to be using HTML5. That's the type of validation that we're going to be using. So for HTML5, we're going to be using a strong, strict, we're going to be using a strict type, which is the only type on HTML, right? Before there were strict and transitional. Right now we're going to be using HTML5, and the reason for this is the book uses HTML5, and we might as well be using something that is new. I like the approach of the book that goes right with the style of the HTML5, right? This is primarily for the layout and the style. So we'll talk about some of that more later as it comes needed, especially in chapter 6, which you can start reading by now if you like. You don't have to go over the other chapters to read chapter 6, and we will cover chapter 6. So you can read a little more about CSS and how to do styles and so on. So in general, a style, you can place it on the HTML file, or you can have your CSS file. And like I said, we're going to use strict HTML. This means, for example, the center, font, and other tags are not allowed in this type of HTML. It's important that you validate the HTML. We're going to go over that later in class. Some questions here. I asked these questions already in class. Test yourself. They're in the book. So how about word wrapping? We went over this. White space in HTML. Line breaks. Well, one way is to do BR, the other one is to do the paragraph. So what is the HT and HTML? Well, hypertext, right? So you guys should know that. And I think most of you do. And what is it that it does? It allows you to follow a link, a URL, which is a uniform resource locator. So this contains, the URL contains the protocol, the server, the path, and the name. So go to page 11 for more information. And another question, this is important. Understand absolute and relative reference. This is going to become important. You already know this. Even if you didn't know done anything with the web, you know about absolute and relative reference in your OS. So one way of think about is, let's say we have this website, avc.com. So here we have data/page.html. So the whole absolute reference is http://www.avc.com/data/page.html. Now, let's say that we want to use a relative reference for a picture inside of a page HTML. This picture is found under data/files/pic.jpg. So what would be the correct way to get this picture, to display this picture using a relative reference? Well, the correct ways would be files/pic.jpg. You may have thought about /files/pic.jpg, but that won't work because that will take it to the root. So where's the root? It's right before the slash. When that you see the .com/, the root starts there. So we see the root, then there's a subdirectory called data, or directory called data, and then there's a subdirectory called files, and then there's pic.jpg. So have this, understand this well. I don't think you guys should have any problems with this. Page 13 shows you some examples, page 14 as well. So it's important because it's going to be useful not only for this part, but it'll be useful also for the later chapters. And I already said what a URL was. So you probably have already encountered many forms, even if you haven't programmed any. An example, for example, like shown in the book, is when you go to your Pantersoft at FIU, which is the FIU registration system to add classes, remove classes, and so on. You'll see that there's a username and password, and there's a sign-in button and other links. So here's a form. That's a form right there. So a form is a way that you have within HTML to specify certain input types. And right now for this chapter, we only concentrated in text and submit. There are more, hidden and so on. So allows you to specify input types so the user can enter data. Is one of the use of. And then you can have a submit button, for example, that would send you to a different page or the same page, like in the example right here in the PowerPoint that I'm showing you. So we're going to be using the forms. You'll see in chapter 2 that it's going to become apparent that we're going to be using the forms. And just make yourself accustomed. You see the form has an input type. So there, right there where you see hobby, you see input type equals, in this case, we're using either text or submit. It's important to have the correct name of the input type. The name equals hobby. Make sure that you have them in a string format, so put the double quotes. And then that value is empty. And so, and this is, you see the form is a per tag, has form, and it ends with /form. So we went more in depth in the class, but how can we send data? So we need to send the data in a one-dimensional form. So in a one-line type of data, one string. So one way of doing it is using what typically you see, for example, in the search engine. You see search.html, and then you see a question mark and some additional strings. This is one way of sending the data. So like here it says, a query string is appended to a URL and carries data that is being passed to a web application. And here it takes the format, name equals value. So I was giving an example on the bottom that says, okay, we have a website /test.html, question mark saying, okay, here's where I'm going to be sending the data. The data comes right after this question mark, and it says country equals USA, name equals value. And the ampersand I'm using to say, okay, this is the next field that I'm sending. And there's other characters that you can add there. So the directory structure, we already did homework number 0, which was to create your structure on your server at school for your account. So most of you should know that you created a web apps. You give it the permissions were 705. In my case here, for this example, I created my app. So that's going to be my application. In your case, you create a root and manager. And always have a web INF folder with the dash, in uppercase. So lowercase and uppercase is really important in Tomcat and in any Linux server, any Unix server, because it's case sensitive. So then we go into the subdirectory of web INF, and inside of the subdirectory we'll have a folder called classes. Here we're going to put our .class files when we compile the Java files, and we'll put our libraries. And remember that web XML? What about the famous web XML that you had to copy for the root and for the manager? And if you haven't done so, I'm going to have special hours, office hours on Tuesday, because I need you guys to get this over by Tuesday. So the web XML is going to contain information required for your app. For now, we don't want to be worrying about modifying the web XML, and we'll talk about it as we go on, as we need to modify it. You saw that for the manager and for the root, you were given web XMLs from Professor Downey's website. And here in the book, in page 19, you can see another example of a simple web XML. So we have one way of creating websites is using Java server page, which is JSP. JSP is embedded inside of the HTML, and JSP can use something called expression language. So we'll go more about JSP in a second, but expression language allows you to extract parameters and put them into HTML. And we're going to be looking into this this coming up Tuesday. So you can, that's page 20 of the book. And for example, if we had a hobby equals water plus skin, and here we're seeing a plus, so there's two water and skin, these two are values for hobby. The way that we will extract it inside of HTML is param.hobby. And here we see an example. So this is a simple HTML page that has a form in it. That's what it says. And here I added big fonts in red just so you see the expression element. But it's a $, curly brackets, and end with curly brackets, and inside you will add param.hobby. For this particular one, it's called hobby. You also will see the and there's an error right here, and I'm going to fix right now. Sorry about that. You also see that in the form, in the input type of the form, and here I'm not showing the entire HTML. I just want you to see a small part. You can also see it in page 21. Inside of the input type, in the value, I have param.hobby, and you can guess what I'm missing? And there was another error of my part. I'm missing the $. make it bold. So this allows you to populate the actual hobby of the person that typed, whatever it may be, soccer, for example, into the text box of the HTML page. It's really a really useful feature. Now you can think of this if this is the first time loading the page. What is the parameter that hobby is going to have? It's going to be an empty string. If you actually open a browser the first time you open this page, and you can try it, this is part of the many examples from the book, and you have the link in the Moodle for the book. Please try the examples. You will see the first time you try it, before you enter anything, your value is going to be an empty string. So the Java server page, right, in which you can check the first JSP in the examples. The Java servlet page, really what's going to happen is really an abstraction. So what's going to happen is that the Tomcat server is going to grab that. It's going to convert the JSP into a servlet. So there's a big servlet in page, it starts at page 24, goes all the way to page 26, that you see what the previous one, which is the example right here in expression language. So the previous one, you can see the previous one, what does it get converted into? So here we have a part of the form. So this is the first JSP. And now we, in page 24 to 26, you see what it actually gets converted into, because it gets converted into a Java class. And pretty much all the HTML becomes an out.write. And you can see this in page 25. So let's remember in the beginning of the PowerPoint for this lecture, I told you about the request and the response. Let's see the big picture. Let's see the whole process. Because now we are also talking about Tomcat, and Tomcat is not the web server. There's different web servers, IIS, Internet Information Services from Microsoft, Apache. We particularly using Tomcat for the servlets. So here we have the server to be an Apache server, and we have the browser. So this was done to process HTML websites, but that's all it's going to do. It really needs, the web server needs to send additional data to an secondary server, you may call secondary server. In this case, a servlet engine, which is the Tomcat that we're using. So we're sending the JSP in this case. It gets translated into a servlet, and then it sends the data back to the web server. So here in figure 1.17 of the book, we can see before I go into this, let me make a note. This figure 1.16, the response data goes back to the server. So you have request data going to the right, and response data is going to the left. So the arrow there is wrong. But you get the idea that web server sends data, says, look, this is the JSP that I need you to process. It doesn't, web server has no idea how you're going to process. Server will take care of it, will process that, and then send back HTML back to the Apache server. So here we have, and you can see those figures in page 27, figure 1.13, 114, and 115. It is extremely important that you purchase the book. Please purchase the book as soon as possible. It will be a good investment, not only for the class, but for the next class that you'll be taking, and for anything that you do relating to JSP. It has really, really nice concepts, especially for, I really like chapter 7 for the shopping cart. So please buy it. So here we have, and I do hear, I'm sorry, I have to say this, I do hear comments saying, oh, it's too expensive. It's $70, $80. And I can understand that it may be expensive. But many times we buy other things for 80 or for 100, and we don't really care about that purchase. But when it comes to a book, especially a book that can be useful to us, $80 is not a lot of money. And if you think about it, the amount of work, I mean, nobody's going to become rich for writing a book. But the amount of work that goes in a book is a lot of work, and it can save you a lot of time. I'm a big believer in books. So please buy it. And yes, I didn't get paid for to say this. So, so first of all, you see in page 29 is figure 1.17. Well, it creates a servlet, you know. Now, remember this is the Tomcat is going to translate the JSP if it's a JSP. We're thinking about JSP at this point. Now it's going to save this in case if it gets requested again, so it doesn't have to do it again. Then it's going to load the servlet, right? Remember it translated it, right? It's going to load the servlet if it's not already in memory. And it's going to create the request and response objects from the data sent from the web server. And then it's going to go ahead and request the object, response the object, and it's going to call the methods for that. So one part I think that is, I don't like to read from the book, but one part I think that it may help to understand is the servlet methods to handle requests, which is the last part here in the figure. Generating the response is done in the JSP service method of the generated servlet. The method has two parameters, the request and the response. These parameters are the objects that the servlet engine generated from the request data that was sent from the browser and from the response data that was forwarded by the web servers. Okay, and then it goes on about the type of objects they are, which is an HTTP servlet request and HTTP servlet response. Whenever a request is made for a JSP, the servlet engine might have to create servlet and might have to load it into memory. If the servlet is recreated, then it will have to reload the servlet into memory. However, even if the servlet is not recreated, the servlet might need to be loaded into memory. Whenever the servlet is restarted, then all the servers are removed from memory. When the next request is made to the servlet, it will need to be reloaded into memory. So you can go ahead and read that yourself. The important thing is, and we'll go over this in class if you have any questions, but the most important thing is that you read chapter 1, right? Read it completely. I did skip 1.6, but you can go ahead and read it, please, especially about the web archive. And look at the questions. Look at the questions 1 through 15, especially 1 through 10 and 12 to 15. And we're going to start soon. By Thursday, we're going to be, so Tuesday is our next class. Thursday, we're going to start chapter 2, which is controllers. It's important that you read chapter 2. I ask you to read section 2.1 for this Tuesday. By Thursday, I hope that you have finished most of chapter 2. It's possibly that we won't finish chapter 2 on Thursday, but I'm going to try to complement the videos. I am going to try to make the videos a little better in terms of highlighting and maybe having some ability to write. So please bear with me as this is the first time I'm creating video lectures. So before I finish, just a reminder about homework 0. Please try to finish it as soon as possible if you haven't. And if you have any questions, email me or see me during class or at my office hours. If you need a different time, see me at, email me and we'll find a time that is convenient for you and I. All right, thank you. This concludes lecture 2B, which covers chapter 1 of Guide to Web Development with Java. Thank you.